Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we have some more Mattel figures to take a look at, as this is the newest wave of Mattel Jurassic World minifigures that has been released. A huge thank you goes out to my friend Keith Olson, who had sent me these figures. I was able to acquire them through him. He actually had told me that he found some at his local store, and he purchased them, and then of course I paid him. He sent them over, and here we are now to take a look at these. And if you actually have not seen this yet, I had posted an unboxing video of the box that included these figures where he had sent me a few really cool extras. So make sure you check that video out. Check out the other fun stuff that he sent me. Some really awesome stuff, especially if you like Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, you'll definitely like that. But anyway, the new figures that we do have here, which this is the entire wave minus 5 figures. The 5 figures that we do not have here, because I was certain they were just repacks of previously released figures, would be the Baryonyx Trio from Camp Cretaceous. We did have those already. In fact, I believe they were in the 15 minifigure pack, which we have reviewed here on the channel. And there was also a green Tyrannosaurus Rex, which has been released a bunch of times at this point. And then Velociraptor Blue, who might have been released more than any minifigure ever, I would imagine. But the other figures, which some of these I do believe are actually repacks as well, which would probably be the Carnotaurus Toro right here and the Triceratops. Those are the only two I think that we have here that were released prior to this wave. The other ones that we have are the Pteranodon, the Stegosaurus, the Brachiosaurus, the Ankylosaurus Bumpy. We also have a really cool bioluminescent Parasaurolophus. And then the new species included in this wave would be the Tarbosaurus, the Irritator, and the Siats. So, without further ado, let's go ahead, jump straight to a closer look right now. So even though I'm quite certain it is a repack, we will take another look here at Carnotaurus Toro. So what we have is a really cool Carnotaurus sculpt that has been released, I think, a few times at this point in the minifigure line. We don't really have to go over any of the figures that we've already reviewed sculpt-wise, just basically what's new, and that would be the paint application. But again, with Toro, I don't know that there's actually anything new with Toro in comparison to the previous Toro from that 15 minifigure pack. You could see that we have that kind of like a light brownish type of a color for the primary body color. We also have some dark brown kind of splotches. I will say, actually, they're very uneven. If you look up here on the top of the tail, you can see there's like an abundance of them on the left side of the dinosaur, not so many on the right, which is very interesting. Definitely going to have to locate my other one and take a look at him to see if he was that same way, where they're really, uneven as far as the distribution of them. You can see there's a lot more over here on this side, which this is definitely the stronger side for the figure, so it is nice to have more on this side, but that leaves the opposing side looking a little bit less spectacular. We also have a light gray here for the lower jaw, and then throughout the underside of the dinosaur. And then we have black eyes, as well as that trademark Carnotaurus Toro wound up here on the face, which isn't actually sculpted into the figure, it's just some red paint on the figure. The inside of the mouth doesn't have any paintwork or anything to it, but we do, of course, have an articulated jaw, which is definitely fun. Really cool Carnotaurus figure. I definitely love that. And then we have the Triceratops, which at this point is the only other one that I think is a repack from the previously released version. And there's not really too much going on with the Triceratops. You can see that primarily the Triceratops is a nice greenish coloration, but we have kind of like a dark green wash up here on the back, which I really do actually like the coloration of that, because I feel like it looks much more nice and natural than just throwing some paint on the figure. I like the way that they've applied it with kind of like a wash as it creeps in between a lot of the scales up there on the back. Definitely looks really cool. A really smooth transition back down to that lighter green coloration for the primary body. We don't really have any paintwork or anything here on the underside at all. And we do have horn paint. Of course, it's kind of like an off-white and black eyes. And that's really about it. As far as the articulation goes, you do have articulation in the neck, which has been, the same style of articulation for the Triceratops, I think, the entire time. Really nice sculpt, though. I absolutely love the Triceratops from Mattel. And then we have the Parasaurolophus. And the Parasaurolophus is quite interesting because, if my camera would focus on it, there we go. I think the figure is the same sculpt, of course, as the previous ones, And there was actually already a bioluminescent version sold by Mattel in that 15-pack of minifigures. However, this one has a different coloration in comparison to the previous one, so we now have two different versions of that kind of bioluminescent Parasaurolophus. This one has some really nice kind of purple that runs down along the side here. You can see it run the entire course of the body all the way out onto the tail, which it's nice to see Mattel adding paint onto the tails, even though it's just minifigures. I wish they'd do that with the larger ones more often. But you can also see some of those purple stripes that run down the course of the thigh. There's no real paint anywhere else, as we don't have any type of like nail paint or anything like that. But then you also have kind of a pinkish coloration up here on the top of the head of the Parasaurolophus that runs along the crest from the beak all the way out through the crest. It lightens up as it gets further out into the crest, but not too much. And then we have a very light hint of pink that kind of runs down into the side of the face of the Parasaurolophus. There also appears to be like some green here in the lower part of the throat, which is really interesting to see. I don't know if there's actually green or if it's just the coloration here of this joint, as the joint is kind of like, I don't know, it's like a bluish color or like a light green. It's very strange, but it gives off kind of like a green tint there in the neck region of the Parasaurolophus. But the sculpt is absolutely beautiful. I really like the sculpt, and definitely a pretty fun looking paint scheme. Obviously the dinosaur has a very glossy appearance throughout, helping to give that bioluminescent type of a look a little bit nicer. The only thing about the minis I wish they would improve upon would be lowering the sizes of the feet, because the feet are just huge on all of their minis. And I know they're obviously larger for stability issues, but I really feel like they would just look a lot nicer if the feet were a little smaller. And then we have the Pteranodon, which I was actually really quite excited to see this because it sports a similar color scheme to a previously released larger version of the Mattel Pteranodon, as I believe we had like a similar color scheme on one of the Pteranodons quite a ways back, and I really do like this coloration. I feel like it's a potentially nice and natural color, and definitely looks good on this mini, probably the most striking, I think, that any of the Mattel Pteranodon minifigures have looked so far. Of course, the sculpt is yet again the same, and what we have paint-wise would be kind of like this. It's almost like a light brownish, greenish type of a color here that runs down the center of the forehead from the crest of the Pteranodon and out the course of the top part of the beak. You don't have any coloration for the underside of the beak, but up here we do have that. We also have black eyes right there for the Pteranodon, and then in the back we have this very nice, of course, primary green coloration for the body, but you have a light green that kind of just splotches all over the back and all the way out through the wings. And it looks really cool. I love the way the two variations of greens play off of each other. Very nice, very flashy as far as the figure goes. And there is actually some extra color variation you may not pick up on straight away, and I've noticed that a lot of these newer Mattel minis do have this. You can see that they have included that speckling with this one. This one has kind of like a dark blue speckling. You can see it through a few areas here in the wings, and I have absolutely noticed that that's quite abundant on a lot of these newer Mattel minis, and I don't recall the older ones having it. They may have, but I don't remember it being quite so visible, and definitely a lot of that speckling here on the underside, which I do quite like because, again, it adds a little extra color variation, and anytime we can get extra color variation, I'm happy because we don't usually get too much. Of course, articulation-wise on the Pteranodon, it would be the wings, and they can fly up and down, and they can also swivel as well, so really cool Pteranodon. Then we have the Stegosaurus, and of course, yet again, same sculpt of the Stegosaurus, but this is the first time we've had this paint version, and this is yet again another version of a previously released Mattel figure now in mini form, as we have had a Stegosaurus with a similar color scheme to this in the past. But this one, although at first glance it almost looks like it's just like two versions of grays, it actually has a few different variations of grays included, which looks really cool because you have kind of like a light gray that runs from the face here throughout the entire lower part of the body. You can see it throughout the legs here, a little bit in the stomach region, but then it transitions as you go up further to a little bit of a darker gray, still a light version of a gray, but a different shade of gray than what we see there on the rest of the area of the figure there. And then, as you can see, as you go up further, you have these very dark gray, almost pavement gray stripes that run down throughout the course of the figure and also overtake the plates up there on the back. So there is definitely a bunch of different variations of grays throughout the course of the figure. And if you move back here into the tail, this tail is actually a slightly different shade of color than what you see everywhere else. It's definitely a different variation of color. I don't know if maybe that's just the way it's playing off of the material, or if it's actually meant to be a different color, but it is actually quite noticeable when you have it in a pretty nice light. And this one as well does include that speckling that we just saw in the Pteranodon. One area you can really see it on there is a nice speckle on the thagomizer out here at the end of the tail, as this one appears to have either a black or a very dark gray speckling to it. And then of course we do have black eyes right there for the head area, but that's really about it for the Stegosaurus. But I really do quite like the coloration of this one. Definitely one of the most appealing minifigure Stegosaurus figures from Mattel. Then we have Ankylosaurus Bumpy, which is really cool to finally have a Bumpy in the line, because we have had plenty of Ankylosaurs in the past from Mattel, but I don't think there was ever one that, you could actually consider a Bumpy, since Bumpy is a newer character. But of course, the sculpt, yet again, the same sculpt as the previously released versions, but I'm always happy to get a repainted version from any of the minifigure lines, because we usually just get straight up repacks, so even repaints are, very appealing to me. But you can see that as far as the coloration goes, we have a nice dark blue that runs the course of the entire upper side of Bumpy, except for, of course, where we have these kind of like ridges that run along the back. You can see those are more of like that primary body color that we see here on the underside. There's definitely a very strong speckling throughout Bumpy as well. Again, all of the newer ones, any of the ones that are not repacks that actually have new paint application, really have this speckling that's quite abundant throughout, which I really do quite like. We didn't notice it on the Toro or the Triceratops, which furthers my evidence of those just being straight repacks, but all of the ones that are actually new repaints definitely have this speckling. And you can see that as far as the coloration here on the head, you have very nicely painted black eyes, and you have a lighter variation of blue here on the top of the head. But that's really about it as far as Bumpy goes. The paintwork there pretty much ends. You can see the darker blue here runs out throughout the tail, but once we get to the club, other than those speckles, there is no real paint application or anything. Of course, yet again, a beautiful Jurassic World style Ankylosaurus sculpt, just absolutely phenomenal as far as a minifigure goes. And I really like the quadrupedal versions because you don't have the oversized feet like you see on the theropods, but you do have an articulated tail on Bumpy, so there is some nice articulation there. And I didn't state on the Stegosaurus, but obviously, same deal, articulated tail. I did forget to mention the articulation of the Stegosaurus. It wasn't focusing right there, but there you go. You can again see the articulation there in the tail. And then the other one that is just a straight up repaint would be the Brachiosaurus. This one sports a beautiful greenish coloration, and I'm normally not a huge fan of greens on Brachiosaurus, but honestly I think this might be the nicest the Brachiosaurus has ever looked from the Mattel minifigure line. Even though it's not exactly accurate to what you see in Jurassic World, it's a really nice, very appealing looking coloration for the Brachiosaurus, and it's beautifully applied. You can see that we start out up here on the back with a nice darker green, but it transitions to a very light green here in the side of the Brachiosaurus. You can see it starts dark there, ends up with a really nice light green, and then transitions further to kind of like a very light green, or like a variation of like a lighter greenish brown for the underside. The speckles are super strong on this one. You can really see those all over the place, just loaded. And this one actually has kind of like a darker green speckling, which you can definitely see even up there in the throat region and everything throughout the Brachiosaurus. It's very, very visible. Of course, we never have nail paint or anything like that for the Brachiosaurus or any of the minifigures, but you can really see how nice those green tones look on the Brachiosaurus throughout the entire course of the figure. Really super smooth, transitions back and forth between those colors, and it's just incredibly striking. And you can really see those blue speckles as we reach the head of the Brachiosaurus over here on this side. If my camera would focus on it, there you can definitely see it now. As you reach the throat region up here or close to the head, you can see lots of those blue speckles, and again those very nicely painted eyes with a black coloration. So beautiful repaint on the Brachiosaurus. I really like this one. And of course we have the articulation in the neck on the Brachiosaurus. So every figure does have one area of articulation. And then the final three are the new species for this one, this wave, and you can see we have the Tarbosaurus, which beautifully replicates the previously released Mattel Tarbosaurus, down to the red jaw and everything. It just looks super, super nice. The sculpt is, again, pretty much just like that larger version of the Tarbosaurus, but in a much smaller size. Very similar look. The ridges running along the back, just like the larger one did have, and lots of that really dark black that runs along the back of the Tarbosaurus, running down here, striping into the tail, which looks super appealing. I love the paint scheme to this Tarbosaurus. I liked it on the initial one. I definitely like it here. Of course, the fine detailing is just beautiful throughout. It's a little bit muted here in the face, but just slightly. But as you move back into the body, you can see the detailing is actually really quite nicely done. You can pick up on the rib cage, beautiful muscle definition throughout. The kneecaps are present, the elbows are present, really nicely sculpted out hands. And the feet look, okay. They're not great, but they're not bad either. But yet again, they're just so oversized. I'm not a big fan of just how large the feet are on the minis. I feel like they could decrease them a little bit because they're just almost ridiculously large. He almost looks like a duck because of how large his feet are. But you do have a pretty nice looking curve here in the tail. The tails are, of course, shorter than they should be, but the Tarbosaurus is in a very nice walking position with the left leg leading, the right leg trailing. Pretty nice looking sculpt again from pretty much every angle. Really nice looking paint application. We do have an articulated jaw, which can open very, very wide, as you can see, and very smooth articulation to that jaw. Of course, the reddish coloration ends straight there in the lower jaw. It does not go any further into the underside or anything. This one does have those speckles, but they're not quite as abundant as what we've seen on some of the other figures. It actually is a red speckling. You can pick up on it every so often. Like there's a small one right here in the front of the leg. There's one down here near the ankle area. So they're there, but they're not all that abundant, not like some of the others that we've seen. But I really love the Tarbosaurus. Absolutely awesome having that one in the line now. And then we have our Irritators. So I'm super psyched to have the Irritator in the line as well. And yet again, it looks very, very much so like the initial larger version of the Irritator did. Very similar sculpt, sporting that kind of almost like a somewhat sail type looking area there to the back, having some of that lighter blue there in the back in that sail-like area, as well as that darker blue that does actually run the course of pretty much the entire dinosaur until we reach the tail. Of course, the tip of the tail just doesn't include it, but for the most part, we do have that darker blue. You can see that run up here into the face as well. Of course, the detailing isn't quite as vibrant as what you see on the larger Mattel figures, because one area on the larger Mattel Irritator that I loved was that very vibrant scale detail in the face up there on the snout and stuff, and you don't see that quite as visibly on the smaller version. It's just a little bit muted because of the fact that the figure is so small, but it's not the end of the world. I would really like for them to actually include some paintwork on the teeth and stuff on these once in a while. That would definitely be very cool, because we do have yet again another articulated jaw, but you can see there's no paintwork to the teeth or the tongues or anything. Definitely something that I feel like could improve the minifigure line. We do have eyes that are painted with a greenish type of a color, I think. Yeah, no, maybe it's a yellow, actually. And they're okay placed for the most part. They don't look bad. But, again, the figure looks really nice. The paint application isn't, of course, anything crazy or over the top. It's pretty basic. But the paint looks nice on the figure. And we have, again, some gorgeous detailing throughout. Pretty darn highly detailed figures for their size. And that's something Mattel usually doesn't ever do, is deliver a poorly sculpted figure as far as the detailing aspect goes. They usually do include a lot of really nice vibrant detail, and although some areas like the face and stuff are a little bit muted, you can see throughout the body it definitely looks really good. And this one has kind of like a darker blue speckling as opposed to some of the others that have had like reds and blacks and stuff. This one's got like a darker blue, but definitely looks quite nice. And again, as far as a miniature version of the Irritator goes, that is awesome. And the final one that we have is the Siats, and I'm really psyched to have a Siats because we previously have only had one version of the Siats released. We've only had one Irritator so far, and one Tarbosaurus actually, but the Siats is such an obscure dinosaur that I was so shocked initially that Mattel even made one, and I'm really psyched to see it get a second release in minifigure form. Of course, just like the others, it looks pretty much just like the initial Siats from Mattel did, obviously sporting a similar sculpt and a similar paint application, which the original Siats from Mattel was a fantastic figure, so that means that the minifigure is pretty much following right in that same trend, a beautifully sculpted figure. I think the detailing of the face on this one might be a little bit nicer than what we just saw in the Tarbosaurus and Irritator. You could just see a little bit more detail throughout, but it definitely looks quite nicely done. Of course, we have the mouth open. You can see the tongue is nicely sculpted out in there, as are the teeth. And of course the jaw is articulated. All of the new species in this wave were all theropods, all have that same style of articulation with the articulated jaw. You can see that the bluish coloration runs up here throughout the face. For the most part, it kind of just leaks down in a few different areas. We do have kind of like a light bluish green type color for the eyes, so the eyes are painted. There's just no actual pupil or anything like that in there. And then as you move throughout the figure, you can see that it also has kind of like a bluish speckling, kind of like the Irritator did. You can see the foot sculpt looks okay. Again, some nice scoots down the course of the feet. You do have dew claws, of course, present. And you can see that this kind of creamy color picks up and then just stripes throughout the course of the figure here, running down the tail and throughout the thigh. Again, very similar to what we saw on the initial Siats from Mattel. But really nice sculpt with the Siats just kind of walking along. The left leg is leading, right leg is trailing, which seems to be almost the exact same thing with all of these. Let's take a look. I think they all had that same style sculpt. So look at that. We got the right leg trailing, the left leg leading. Same deal with the Tarbosaurus. So all of the new species have pretty much exactly the same pose for them, as it's just kind of a walking pose. Nothing crazy obnoxious or anything, but definitely something to take note of. But you can see that those kind of ridges and stuff that run along the back of the Siats are all very nicely sculpted out throughout the course of the figure. And we actually do have some variations of blue. As you can see, it's kind of like a really dark blue up here on the top, but it transitions to a slightly different shade of blue here for the side, or at least it looks like that to me. I can't confirm that, but it definitely looks like a slightly different shade of darker blue as you reach this area. But regardless, another really awesome Mattel minifigure, and I am beyond excited to have at least 3 new species entering the minifigure line. And as far as stability goes, whoop, I knocked the Siats over. The Siats stands quite nicely. The Tarbosaurus does as well, and so does the Irritator. So those are the only ones that we really need to check, because those are the 3 newest ones. We know very much so that, of course, especially with quadrupeds, the quadrupeds are going to stand with no issues at all. Being 4-legged dinosaurs, you're not going to have too much of an issue with those guys. But Toro does as well stand really quite nicely. As soon as I say that, he falls backwards. Parasaurolophus also stands nicely, and of course the Pteranodon is not going to stand at all because it has no ability to stand, considering it is in a soaring position. But as far as a size goes, I'm not going to measure each and every one. I'm just going to kind of hold the tape measure over here to just give you a rough idea. Like for Toro, you're looking at right around the 4-inch or 10-centimeter range, so helping to give you an idea of the fact that they all sport that same size range of the minis previously. There's no difference. They haven't been upscaled. They haven't been downsized, anything like that as far as the sizes go. And to show you that more so with a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Ankylosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line in comparison to our newest wave of minifigures. And you can definitely see that again, size-wise, they're sporting the same similar size range to all of the previously released minifigures, especially since a lot of them are just totally reused sculpts, but with new paint application. And some of them don't even have that. Some of them don't have new paint application at all, but again, showing you that they are definitely the same size, sporting a very small size, but not too small. They're definitely nicely sized, I would say, for what a minifigure should be. So this newest wave of Mattel minifigures, the Dino Escape minifigures, which this is the first line of that style, the Dino Escape style. But at this point, I don't know what wave we're on, honestly, of minifigures. Like at first, I was kind of trying to keep track. At this point, I have no idea, because they were releasing so many waves back probably about a couple months to a year ago or so, and they would just keep popping out new waves, which the new waves were all repacks, aside from like maybe one that was kind of like a metallic version, and then they'd release another wave that had like one that was a metallic version, and every so often they'd sneak like a slight repaint in. but this is the first time in quite a while that we've had a lot of new stuff going on in the minifigure line. I almost was thinking that they may have given up on it altogether and we weren't really going to get anything new, and then out come these guys, which was really exciting for me, sporting 3 new sculpts as far as new species entering the line, as well as a bunch of really cool repainted versions of previously released figures. The Carnotaurus Toro that we have here definitely looks to be the same Toro that we had in that 15 minifigure pack. I don't see any differences, or at least nothing that's overly dramatic enough that I would notice it. Definitely looks to be the same figure, which is a really nice looking Carnotaurus, beautiful looking sculpt, very nice looking paint application for something that's just kind of a basic mini. Then we also have the Triceratops, which sports a really nice greenish coloration. Yet again, another one that I feel like is definitely a repack of a previously released Triceratops. I wish they would have given those two some new paint application, just something to differentiate them a little bit from the previous releases, but it definitely doesn't seem like they've done that. They just seem to be straight repacks. And we also have, again, the Baryonyx Trio, the Tyrannosaurus, and Velociraptor Blue that are also included in this wave that I did not acquire because I saw no need to rebuy those and re-add them to my collection. The Triceratops and Carnotaurus, I did have him pick up just because I wasn't positive if they were the same or if they were different, but I could definitely say here in hand they look to be the same. The Parasaurolophus sports a very similar look to a previously released kind of bioluminescent version, but with a very different coloration, as we now have a purple and pink type of a look throughout the course of this figure compared to the previously released version, and I think it looks really nice. Again, if you're a fan of the Camp Cretaceous version, it's definitely a very fun figure to have. Maybe not the most realistic looking paint scheme for a Parasaurolophus, but considering it's a Camp Cretaceous version and the fact that those dinosaurs in that show do have a bioluminescent appearance to them, it makes complete sense. We have the Stegosaurus, which in my opinion is one of, if not the nicest looking mini Stegosaurus figures we've had from Mattel. I really love the grayish paint scheme on that one, and it does have, again, quite a few different tones of gray included to it, which is definitely nice to see. It is a very, very appealing looking Stegosaurus. We also have the Pteranodon, which obviously does not sport any type of a paint scheme we've ever seen in any of the Jurassic films, but it looks really cool. I love the paint scheme. Definitely a very similar look to a previously released larger Mattel Pteranodon, and it looks great on this minifigure. Probably, I think, the best the mini Pteranodon has looked as well. We also have Bumpy the Ankylosaurus, which is one of the favorites, I would think, from the Camp Cretaceous show. We have previously had a baby version. We now have the adult version, sporting again that really nice bluish paint scheme, similar to Bumpy from the show. And she looks great on this minifigure, just like she did on the previously released baby mini version. We have the Brachiosaurus, which yet again I think is potentially the nicest that the Brachiosaurus has looked. Again, not exactly accurate to what you would see in the Jurassic films, as I don't think we've seen any type of like a green, or at least not quite green like this, Brachiosaurus in any of the Jurassic films or shows, but it looks beautiful on this figure. Very nice and appealing tones of color used, and the actual application of the paint is really beautiful, and I feel like the greens on this really make the Brachiosaurus detail pop a lot nicer than some of the previous paint schemes have. We then have the Tarbosaurus, which is a gorgeous Tarbosaurus, and this is one of the 3 new species to enter the minifigure line. Really nice looking overall, very similar again to the initial Tarbosaurus from Mattel, which was a beautiful figure, and this one as well looks fantastic if you ask me. We have the Irritator, which I think is probably honestly the weakest of the newest figures here, from the new species I should say, in this set. I don't know what it is about it. It looks absolutely awesome, but just not as awesome as the others do. But still a really nice looking Irritator figure, and I'm psyched to have the Irritator entering the minifigure line. I wonder if we'll get, repaints of these guys at some point, or if they're only going to release them once, replicating the larger versions and call it a day. I would like to see some alternate paint schemes of these guys at some point in the future, even in the larger Mattel line. That would be nice to see. But then we have the final one, which would be the Siats, and that one is probably the most exciting for me out of all of these, because again, the Siats is really obscure and we've had so few figures from any company of it, so to have now 2 different figures of the Siats from Mattel is super awesome if you ask me. Again, very similar look to the larger version like we had with all of the others in the newer species added to the line. But all of these minis are absolutely beautiful, so if you can find them, make sure you pick them up. They should be showing up at Targets and potentially Walmarts at some point in the very near future. And if you do find them again, I have included a list to tell you which ones are which, and I will actually show you right now again which ones are which as far as the list goes, so that you can find them when they do officially start to show up in stores. That will help you locate which figures are in which package to purchase them, rather than purchasing a million of the same figure. But again, make sure you pick them up if you can in fact find them, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.